Every year, Which tests thousands of the products that you rely on every day. And we've been doing it for over 60 years.
Which reviews are 100% impartial. We don't accept freebies from manufacturers, and we have no owners, shareholders, or government departments to answer to. So our work is on behalf of you, the consumer.
In a world of misleading claims and fake reviews, we test everything, from everyday items to big purchases, so that you don't have to.
We then put them through tests and assessments that go beyond the accepted standard to work out how well these products work for you and what's not worth your money. And a Which membership not only gets you access to our reviews, it also funds our non-profit campaigning work, like getting scam ads banned on social media and ending broadband and mobile mid-contract price hikes. And right now, podcast listeners can become a Which member for 50% off the usual price by heading to which.co.uk/podcast offer.
EVs are bad for the environment. Their batteries degrade too quickly, and there's nowhere to charge them. It's time to debunk the biggest myths about electric vehicles. I'm James Rowe, and welcome to this podcast from Which. Thanks for joining us. Now, if you've subscribed and been listening to Which Money recently, you might have seen that our sister show, Which Short, has been dropping onto this feed too. Hopefully you've been enjoying those episodes. Well, excitingly, we'll also be bringing you other podcasts on a whole host of topics. And to kick things off, get ready to strap in as we get under the bonnet of electric cars. And I'm pleased to be joined by three of our cars experts here at Which. First of all, let me welcome Which Cars editor Will Stapley. Will, hello.
Hello again.
And also from the Cars team, Michael Passingham. Michael.
Hello.
And Dino Buratti. Dino, hello.
Hello.
Well, for this podcast, we reached out to Which members to ask them for their questions about EVs. And our experts are here to answer them. If you'd like to take part and ask your questions when we do episodes like this in the future, you can become a Which member yourself right now. Just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. And right now you can get 50% off an annual membership. There's loads of other benefits from a membership too, depending on which tier you choose. So just head to that website to find out more. Now then, a lot of the questions we got were about EV myths, weren't they? So we thought we'd try and put the record straight. Before we do, though, quickly to begin with, where do you think we are with EVs at the moment? Who wants to take this one? Do they have a good reputation? There are still a lot of myths out there. Where do we think we stand?
Well, the thing about myths is that there's always an element of truth to controversial topics, and to dismiss everything as a myth would be, I think, unfair to people who have genuine concerns. So I think the problem is, it's a very political topic still, and it is something that can cause people to have to spend more money, especially if they can't charge at home, that kind of stuff. And there are still questions about the environment, as we'll get to. So while we're not here to try to convince anybody, I think just having an open and honest discussion about EVs helps keep this conversation moving forward.
And I think it's really valuable to have two sides of the argument there. So you've got people who are very pro-EVs, people who are against them, get all the different viewpoints being surfaced, and then at Which we're here to take the balanced view and give you the facts, and you make up your mind on it.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. Well, shall we kick off with this first one? Michael, you did touch on this. EVs are bad for the environment. Where does this idea come from?
Well, let me raise this instead. Personal motoring is bad for the environment, and it's a kind of a case of pick your poison. So yes, neither fossil fuel cars nor EVs are squeaky clean by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, for your local environment, EVs produce zero tailpipe emissions. There are concerns around particulate emissions from tyres and brakes, although that's a whole other topic that's very complex. Although I will say here, the question about brake emissions, which has been talked about in the news recently, is based on perhaps a misunderstanding of how EV brakes work. Actually, EVs rarely use their brakes if they're driven fairly slowly, because they use the motors to recharge the batteries, which has its own braking effect. If you're thinking about the global environment, yes, the mining of the critical minerals or precious metals for EV batteries is not great. This is something that needs to be worked on, but I would also say that the oil and gas industry is, again, far from perfect when it comes to the extraction and distribution of petrol and diesel as well. So there are obviously issues with the batteries in terms of what you do with them when they reach the end of their life. However, methods are being worked on to make recycling of batteries more effective and less energy intensive. And it's also worth remembering that while batteries can be recycled, once you've put petrol or diesel into your car and burned it, it's gone forever. So yeah, there's lots of conversation to be had here, and it is up to legislators, the companies themselves, and the car manufacturers as well to improve this stuff and also communicate and be honest and open about it instead of pretending that it's all good all the time.
To put you on the spot here, Michael, it's often said, people say, I'm going to get an EV because I want to be sustainable, I want to do what's right for the environment. So take me, I've got a 2015 Ford Focus. It's okay, no huge repairs. I am thinking of replacing it relatively soon, but would I be doing right for the environment by ditching that and getting an EV?
It's a tricky one. So there are often calculations done in terms of how long it takes for the carbon emitted in producing an EV and its batteries versus just running a petrol car. The numbers obviously vary. They're based on very loose calculations, but once an EV has driven about I think it's about 30,000 kilometers, but just take this number with a huge pinch of salt. By that point, a petrol car will have emitted about the same amount of carbon. So over the course of a lifespan of a car, EVs are better from a carbon perspective. So every mile you drive after that 30,000 figure is, in an EV, better for the environment from a carbon emissions perspective. But these kinds of calculations are much more complicated than many people would have you believe.
Well, I think this moves us on nicely to the next question that we've got. If Will was considering buying an electric car, we got a comment from one Which member who said that electric cars are too expensive for me to buy. Dino, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, so we did some analysis in February 2025 comparing electric car prices of cars we've tested with petrol and diesel cars, and we found that for large cars, the average electric car costs £10,000 more new as a typical price than a petrol or diesel car. However, this is obviously depending a lot on different car classes. So for medium cars, that figure is less than £2,000. And that's because there are quite a few cheaper Chinese options in this class, such as the Aura 03, BYD Dolphin and MG4. In the small car class, we'd expect that gap to be quite similar as well, because even though we haven't tested cars like the Dacia Spring, Citroen EC3 and Leapmotor T03 yet, they all start at less than £20,000, as does the Fiat Grande Panda, which has just gone on sale as well. There's also the case of the Vauxhall Frontera. Vauxhall, the manufacturer, has been very prominent in saying that the electric version costs exactly the same as the petrol version, about £24,000 new. And 17 electric cars we've tested do have a typical new price of under £30,000, although I should say that the figure for petrol, diesel and mild hybrid cars is 74 that cost under £30,000 new. So there is still a long way to go in making more affordable electric cars that people are able to buy for less than £30,000. This is buying new as a cash price. Obviously with finance, manufacturers can often put quite significant deposit contributions down on their electric cars in order to sell them. So you might get a better deal with an electric car on finance than you would as a petrol or diesel car.
And at the moment, so many people might consider buying a used car, whether that is a petrol, diesel or electric. Is it fair to say that if you bought a used electric car, you might actually find yourself quite a better deal?
Yeah, definitely. We've looked at depreciation as well of electric cars, and a lot of electric cars are typically used as salary sacrifice cars for company cars, and these are run by people who typically travel quite large mileages a year. That will reduce the value of the used car. And the fact that a lot of new EVs are quite heavily discounted when they're new will reduce their resale value as well, because if you're buying a used car, say a 1-year-old Peugeot 208 and it's about £18,000, but you can get a new one for £20,000, it's up to you whether you'd buy that new car or the used car, because the new car will have slightly longer warranty. It'll be brand new, it'll have no miles on the clock. We've looked at some data from Auto Trader. They've done a few calculations around a few electric cars, running it for 6 years and 60,000 miles, and all 5 they looked at are worth less than their petrol equivalents over that period. 3 of those are worth about £1,000 less on average, although the data shows that the EVs tend to lose more of their value in the first year they're on the road, and then after that, depreciation rate is similar to other cars.
Interesting you mentioned that, because this is again something that our Which members have been in touch. Somebody got in touch and said, can anyone explain why I should buy another EV when the one I have has depreciated by 26% in just over 2 years. Internal combustion engine cars depreciate far less. Is that a fair assessment?
Some ICE cars can lose 40% of their value in just a few months, relatively high performance models. So I was looking the other day at this BMW M8 competition Grand Coupe, and it was got a list price new of about £152,000, and the dealer is asking about £85,000 for it. So that car has lost in 3 months £55,000, which is a lot of money.
So if you're looking at buying an electric car and you think you're buying new, you've really got to think carefully about that, because you're going to suffer a massive drop in that first year. Dino, I think you got
so Auto Trader's data suggests that an electric car will lose about a third of its value typically after the first year. For a petrol or diesel car, it's only about a fifth. But then after that, depreciation tends to slow down. After 6 years, your electric car will have lost 70% of its value. If you've got a petrol or diesel car, that just goes down to 40% of its value that's been lost if you're doing 10,000 miles a year.
And these are all kind of average figures, so it depends on how you treat the car, what happens with it, but it shows that first year and a half maybe big drop, then actually comparable to petrol and diesel.
And why is that happening? Why do EVs depreciate quicker than petrol or diesel cars?
I would hazard a guess. Some of it is that people are concerned about some of the things we're going to talk about in this podcast, such as battery degradation, waiting for the next technology to come around the corner. I guess because they're quite electronic, you're thinking about it in the same way as you might a phone. Why would I buy the old version if I can buy the new one on finance?
Because you might think, oh, well, the new model might come out next year, I'll wait for that one. And then it does come out, and then again, they just lose value so quickly because there's a new model waiting to be picked up from the showroom.
Yeah, and we're always promised the next big thing. And again, because it's like the tech industry, there's nervousness around committing when things are moving so quickly.
I think the big hope is that you'll get these batteries that can suddenly take you 1,000 miles on single charge. But actually, a decent electric car now can take you close to 300. For most people, that's fine. And if you think you can cope with that, I wouldn't hold back on buying an EV because you're afraid you might miss out on the big next tech. That's pretty good where it is at the moment.
Then on to myth number 4. Michael, do you want to take this one for me? EVs suffer more faults and breakdowns. Is it true? I guess I should say more faults and breakdowns than petrol or diesel cars.
Yes, but
okay.
As is always the case, there's always a but. So in our most recent reliability survey, which was carried out between April and June last year on about 60,000 plus people, we did find that EVs had more faults in their first 4 years of their life than equivalent petrol and diesel cars. However, the faults those cars are suffering aren't specific to them being EVs. So the most common issue is stuff with onboard computer software. All cars have onboard computer software, petrol, diesel, or otherwise. They all have quite similar functionality. So that's one of the most common problems, and that's not unique to EVs, although it's one that proportionally occurs much more often with EVs. So there's definitely some work to be done there on figuring out what's going on. Then after that, it's the 12-volt battery that seems to be causing issues. Again, that's the battery that all cars have that you sometimes run out of. Also issues with aircon and cooling systems. As they get older, EVs tend to have more issues with suspension, statistically significantly more than other types of car. I wouldn't like to speculate, but perhaps it's because they're heavier. There you go, I have speculated. But yeah, these are general trends. It's worth checking your individual cars, seeing how people are finding them on owners' forums online, checking our reliability information on the Which website. Because yes, while it's always interesting to see reliability stats over all different types of fuel, it is really down to the individual cars. There are some decent brands for reliability and some less decent brands. So it's really worth checking that before you commit.
Because I think it would be fair to assume, based on that comment of EVs suffer more faults and breakdowns than petrol and diesel cars, that there's more that can go wrong with an EV. The data you lent on there would suggest that it's not necessarily those elements of the car that are going wrong.
Yeah, the expensive stuff doesn't go wrong that much. So the batteries typically are under a 7 or 8 year warranty, and the electric motors similarly sometimes are under their own specific warranty as well. They have much fewer moving parts. There's a lot less to go wrong in that stuff. Obviously, when it does go wrong, and we have looked into this at Which, our colleague Hannah Downs wrote, I think in the March issue of Which, about what happens when an EV breaks down.
Yeah, and that report's online at which.co.uk/EV repairs, and it's well worth a read.
Yeah, so there is an issue with skilled professionals being able to work on EVs, and also how you actually recover EVs. But it's all being worked on, maybe not as fast as it should be. But yeah, maybe it's just that the perception and the facts don't quite match up. But again, like everything else we've talked about, there are elements of truth here that people should be concerned about.
And just to touch on this once more, if there are elements specific to an EV that go wrong and you do take it to a garage. Garages are learning and adapting like the rest of us, aren't they, with EVs? So it may actually take them a little bit longer to train up and adapt to a new skill set. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and actually the final point on this is that in our survey we find out how long cars are spent off the road for repairs. EVs spend longer than the average amount of time for a car to be off the road when it's faulty. They spend on average 5.3 days off the road, while the average car is 4.8. So again, that does show, like you say, that there is an issue of speed. So there is an issue with finding the right people to do the job.
Next up then, I've got this comment from John, who is a Which member, and it's about EV batteries degrading too quickly. John says, the range is too short for me. Also, I've seen documentaries warning of not letting your charge go below 20% and not charging above 80% because it damages the battery. This reduces an effective range from circa 180 miles to 100, which is useless to me, except for local driving. A lot to unpack there.
There is, and yeah, John has highlighted an issue that is definitely true. Again, yes, the advice is for most EVs, you don't let them run under 20%. Obviously, you can, but it's not great for the health of the battery. Similarly, charging them above 80% isn't great for the health of the battery, especially if you leave it at over 80% for an extended period of time. However, modern EVs are quite good at managing their own battery health, and while, yes, there is some management you need to do yourself, it will depend on the car. But yeah, when you look at the range of a car, and then you think about your own personal use, yeah, if the sort of that 60% window isn't anywhere near enough for you, don't buy that EV. And perhaps EVs aren't right for you until something that works for you in terms of that range comes on the market.
But I think it's also important to say that it's not going to damage your car if you go from 100% to 10% in a journey every so often. This is long term, and important as well to check your car's manual, because there'll be very specific instructions there about what the manufacturer recommends and how the car will manage it itself. Not least if you have a problem, you're going to want to be able to tell them that you've followed their official advice if it comes to a warranty claim or something like that.
And one other thing to add is that, yeah, in our most recent survey, people who reported having bought a new EV in 2017 or 2018 and still held on to it until they did our survey last year, the average remaining range was 93%. That's self-reported by the owners, but they are experiencing roughly 93% of the original range when they bought the car new, which could be a car that's 6 or 7 years old.
You can understand why this would be a concern to some drivers, though, can't you? Because obviously your fuel tank for petrol and diesel doesn't decrease in size, so you're not going to lose range with an internal combustion engine car. So you can understand why it would be a concern. But then on the flip side, I was trying to put this into different terms when I was reading into some of this. And yeah, I looked at my phone battery, and Michael, I know you used to work in the tech team here at Which, so you'll have experienced a lot of this. I looked at the capacity of my current phone's battery. I only bought it last year, and that's on 96%. So other things in our life kind of degrade in that same way, don't they?
Yeah, and that's it. And people do think about car batteries in the same way as they do phones. Car batteries are better at holding on to charge over time than phone batteries. Yeah, mine is 3.5 years old and it's down to 81%, which is really irritating. But it's really hard for people to disconnect those two concepts of phone batteries and car batteries. But yeah, like you say, it's something that you have to consider. And anyone who tells you it's not an issue isn't being entirely truthful. You just have to make sure you're buying the car that works for your needs now, but also however long you plan to hold on to it for.
Let's take a quick break now. We'll be back with more in just a sec.
If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer. Or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.
Welcome back to the show. A quick reminder, we're answering questions from our Which members today. If you'd like to have your questions answered in the future, make sure you become a member yourself by heading to which.co.uk/podcast offer. You can join right now for 50% off the usual price. Now, Dino, I'm going to come to you for this one. Public charging for electric vehicles can cost more than refueling a petrol or diesel car. Is it true?
It is true, yes. Well, because we've seen a lot of fast, rapid and ultra-rapid chargers that cost around 79 pence per kilowatt hour. Sometimes they can cost a lot more. And even a flow charger is about 55 pence per kilowatt hour if it's public, and it's like one of those lamppost ones you sometimes see in cities. We've done some calculations, and if you were to refuel a large petrol or diesel SUV, this is just an average of all the cars we've tested, it costs around 16 pence per mile. That's based on paying about £1.37 a litre for petrol and £1.43 a litre for diesel. If you were to pay 79 pence per kilowatt hour for an EV, it works out about 25 pence per mile to run it. That's just an average for all EVs, considering that a lot of large electric SUVs are quite heavy and inefficient. That figure would be significantly higher. However, if you charge at home, this is where things get better. On average, if you were to charge at the standard tariff, it's about 8 pence per mile. If you charge overnight using a specialist EV tariff, it can get as low as 2 pence a mile, which is obviously a lot cheaper than petrol or diesel. As an example, we've got the BMW iX has been through our lab test, and it has an average efficiency of 2.8 miles per kilowatt hour. It'll use 1,786 kilowatt hours of energy over 5,000 miles of driving. That's the average annual mileage from the latest Which Car survey. If you were to pay 46 pence per kilowatt hour to charge, that would mean you're paying 16 pence per mile, which is slightly more expensive than the equivalent size petrol or diesel SUV. However, if you charge your majority of your time at home, you can easily offset that charging cost difference, especially if you're charging overnight on the very cheap EV tariffs that some energy companies offer.
I think there's a lot of figures there. The end point is, if you can't charge at home, or you don't have somewhere perhaps at work where you can get cheap charging, and you're going to be reliant on a public charging network, it can get quite expensive. So yeah, seriously consider that if you're thinking about an EV. Make sure you've got somewhere you can charge it relatively cheaply.
Because we're not at the point, are we, at the moment, where the public charging points or the public charging facilities are to where they kind of ought to be or should be to put people into a position to really consider an EV?
Yeah, no, I think we're getting there. There are more appearing every day, but the problem is they're just so darn expensive and slow, frankly. If you've got an EV, you're not going to be charging it on a public charging point from 20 to 80%. Well, you might do, but you're going to be there a long time.
Because can you try and give us a bit of a figure on this? Because if I pulled up to a petrol station in my petrol car and I put the hose in and filled it up, it might take 2 minutes tops. For an EV that was pretty much low or empty, how long would it take at a public charge point?
So it depends on the charging speed your car can take. The maximum most cars can currently take is about 350 kilowatts, but there are very few chargers that can dispense electricity at that speed, and even then, if there's going to be more than one car there or the weather conditions aren't perfect, you're not going to get that speed.
You're not going to get it done in 2 minutes then, are you?
No.
How long will it?
A good electric car at 350 kilowatt charging rate is about 20 minutes to get from 10 to 80%. If it's on a slower 50 kilowatt charger, it could easily be over an hour. If you're charging on a slow charger, it'll probably take all day.
If you find one that might take 20 minutes and you do a motorway drive and you stop at a services, you plug it in, grab a bite to eat, nip to the toilet, I guess it justifies it. But what we're really saying is you want to have a charging point at home or some sort of charging facility at home, at work, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, Will. I think so. And I think it's a mindset thing as well. You often hear people saying, oh, you need a break anyway on a long journey. For some people, they don't. They need to get somewhere. They got 5 minutes for a quick stop. They can't wait 20 minutes. And that's a fair comment. So you have to think when you're buying an EV, if you're doing a long journey, yeah, you're just going to have to factor in that 20, 30-minute charge. And that's just one of the things of owning an EV. There's some downsides. There's a lot of positives as well.
Yeah, and that assumes that the charge at the services are going to be available anyway. Some services have a lot more charger than others, and you could be waiting quite some time for a charging slot to become available if there's a lot of other EVs waiting to use those chargers.
Plenty to consider for that one. Let's move on to this one. Michael, do you want to take this one? EVs are more at risk of catching fire. Is this scaremongering, or is there an element of truth to this one?
So I had a look at some numbers. There's a London Stats website, official gov.uk stats site. I looked into the numbers of the number of car fires in London in 2023. There were 757 car fires that year. 55 of those were on cars that had a lithium battery of some kind. Could be a hybrid, could be a battery electric, full electric car. We don't have better numbers than that. So that's about 7% of car fires were cars that had lithium batteries. Obviously, we don't know what actually caused the fire there. From that, there were 396,000 and a bit battery cars in London, again, hybrids as well, out of 2.5 million cars, making about 15% of cars with lithium batteries in London that year. So 7% of fires, 15% of the overall market.
So it doesn't marry up necessarily?
It doesn't, but the numbers are really hard to get on this. And because one of the other things you might see is that fire departments are dealing with a lot of battery fires. A lot of those, actually many more of them, are on electric scooters. The numbers I've shown you here, they don't include scooters, but some of the numbers you might see elsewhere in the press will include them, and those are vehicles that are not road legal, not insured, not taxed. The other thing to say, very quickly, is that, when a battery electric car does catch fire, it burns hotter, it burns longer, it takes a lot more water to deal with them. And fire brigades are having to learn how to deal with these. They need to work with manufacturers and, again, legislators to figure out how best to understand how to treat these fires. But typically, according to the Essex Fire Brigade, a typical car fire would take about 2,000 litres of water to extinguish. An electric vehicle could take up to 30,000 litres of water to fully extinguish. So, these are things to be concerned about. EVs are designed to disconnect their electrical bits when they sense a collision to prevent these fires from happening. But, yes, it could happen, and the fires are much more hot and long.
Let's do this one now from Sarah. It's about insurance, particularly the price for insurance. Sarah says that insurance is much more expensive for EVs. Is that true? Is it a turn-off for people? What are the facts here?
Yeah, well, I think it's perhaps something people only realise, perhaps even after they've bought an EV, they're going to get it insured and they're perhaps quite shocked that it is more expensive. And, that's the insurance industry for you. Electric cars tend to be a lot more expensive, as we've heard before. When they go wrong, they can take a bit longer to get repaired, so there's courtesy car costs involved there. And premiums are higher. It will hopefully improve over time. My advice would be check it out. If you can get the reg plate of the car you're looking at, put it into, we've got our own insurance comparison site. You can go to which.co.uk/car-insurance. Put it in there, see what it's like, and wrap that up in your overall decision, because it's likely to be a bit higher, unfortunately. It's all about risk with insurance.
And we are still in a transition period, aren't we, from petrol and diesel cars to electric cars. In theory, in the long run, as we have more electric cars on the roads, will premiums come down?
Well, I think premiums, unfortunately, seem to be going up whatever at the moment, particularly. But what you can hope is that the difference between petrol and diesel and electric will become less, and then over time, as EVs become more prominent on the road, you'd hope that they would drop a bit. But it's a guessing game, unfortunately.
Okay, let's do this last one then. It comes from Mark, who's a Which member, and it's about EV range dropping dramatically in cold weather. Now, surely this one isn't true.
It is.
Is it?
It's a science fact.
Wow.
We know that these kinds of batteries don't perform so well in colder weather. They also don't charge as quickly when they're cold. The Norwegian Automobile Federation has carried out its annual ELPRI, which is where they drive a bunch of EVs in cold weather and compare what they get with the nominal manufacturer-stated range. And they found that, depending on the EV, and these are conditions between 0 degrees and -10, which they call mild winter conditions, which would be for them, you could see a drop between 4 and 30%. Obviously, that's a big difference. So, it's true. You need to consider that fact that whatever range you see, will it also work for you on a winter's day? If it's not, buy something with more range. And also do a little research on whether there is information out there on how these batteries perform. We tend to say expect around a 20% drop as a kind of worst case scenario, and that will help you decide if EV is right for you, especially if you drive a long way in the winter.
And is this because the electric motor is heating the car and it's diverting power away from powering the drive?
It's a tiny bit of that, but it's mostly the chemical side of the batteries. They're just not as efficient at delivering the power at colder temperatures. So a lot of cars now have battery heaters, and if you set them in your sat-nav, you're driving to a charging station, the battery heater will kick in to mean that the battery will not only operate more efficiently, but charge more quickly once you get to the charging station. But not all EVs have that, because it can be a slightly premium feature.
So, as always, with pretty much everything we've discussed, this is just something to consider before you buy an EV. There are a lot of considerations before buying an EV.
It's not a gotcha like some people would say. It's just a thing to consider, like any purchase. Do your research, understand the facts, and then figure out if it's right for you.
Yeah, and on that note, Michael has put together a quite fantastic guide on whether you should consider buying EV, the kind of questions. A lot of the stuff we've talked about here, but in a bit more detail as well. That's at which.co.uk/EV guide, and that is definitely worth the read. And if there's anything in there that you want answered that isn't in there, do get in touch through the feedback form.
Yes, indeed. Now, I feel like there's so much more we could have discussed today about EVs and cars in general, but I think we probably would have been here for hours and hours longer. So instead, we've put loads of other useful links in the description of today's show. Plus, if you're a Which member, there's some useful member-only tools linked in there too. We'll pop loads in there for you. And your final reminder as well that if you're not already a member and you'd like to join, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer to become a member for 50% off the usual price. Very quickly, before I let you all go, what's next for the cars team? What have you got coming up over the next few weeks and months?
Well, there's a big push on safety at the moment. We're doing a lot of work on that. Michael's done a Which magazine article, which is in the current issue, about the tech features that drivers are tending to turn off for whatever reason. But we're going to look at that in more detail and do a lot more work on that.
Yeah, and the Which Car survey is about to launch, so make sure you're signed up to the Which Cars newsletter to find out, so you can fill in, tell us about the experience you've had with your car.
Which.co.uk/cars newsletter is the place to go for that one. Well, thanks so much for joining us, you three. Will, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Michael, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And Dino, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That brings to an end another podcast from Which. There's loads more for you to read about everything we discussed today. Just head to the episode description for more useful everyday advice. There you'll also find an exclusive offer for podcast listeners like you to become a Which member for 50% off the usual price, giving you access to our product reviews, our app, one-to-one personalised buying advice and every issue of Which magazine across the year. Plus, your membership helps us to make life simpler, fairer and safer for everyone. If you'd like to know when we release a new episode, then make sure you press subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you can be one of the first to listen. And for any questions, comments or anything in between, follow us on social media at WhicHUK or email us podcasts@which.co.uk. Goodbye.
Leaking roof? Car won't start? Needs to renovate? Here's what to look for when getting a trader to help. A recognised endorsement, where expert assessors set the bar high. Genuine customer reviews, so you don't get duped by cowboy fakers. A clear code of conduct to give you an extra layer of security. A robust complaints policy, so you can resolve disputes fairly. And the Which Trusted Trader badge that says, choose me with confidence. You can trust Which to help you find the right traders for the job. We run thorough checks on traders, put them through in-depth assessments, then we give them the actions to make improvements and only endorse them when they've actioned them and made the grade. So, to choose with confidence, head to which.co.uk/traders or search for Which Trusted Traders.